Welcome back. In this video, we are going to talk about dependency properties, and they are super important as soon as we get to data binding. And generally, it makes sense for you to understand how they work. So let's go ahead and create a button within our grid. And we simply do that by creating the button keyword, as we have seen multiple times already. And here I'm just gonna assign a height of, let's say, 100 pixels and a width of 200 pixels, and then the content of click me. And now I want to use something called background. So there's a property called background, and I want to assign that to Azure or Azure. So that's going to be my button. And as you can see now, it has this Azure color. Maybe we should make it red. Okay, red is pretty strong, pale violet red. That looks good. So a simple color. So the idea behind this is that I want to go ahead and explain to you what dependency properties are, where they are, and how to create your own dependency properties. And it's pretty easy to do it with a button, I'd say. And by the way, this button, and actually I'm gonna close it like that because I want to style that button. So within the button tags, I want to add some more style to that button, and the style should be a trigger. So I want to trigger. So if I get into the buttons area, then I want to change the color or something like that. So I'm gonna use button.style. Now that button style needs a style in here, so I can create our own style in here. And I'm gonna set a target for that style. Target type is going to be button. Now, that's not enough, because what I now want to do is to add a trigger to that style. So I'm gonna use style triggers, like this one. And now I can go ahead and create beautiful little triggers, which will be fired once an event occurs. And we have seen events already, but that's a little different event. So it's a trigger, which we can use as following. We can create a trigger in here, and that trigger will have a property, and that one is, for example, is mouse over. So once the mouse is over that button, then the value should be set to true. And in that trigger, I need to have setters then. So what shall happen if that's the case? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna set the property font size to the value of 30, because now the font size is a lot smaller. So here we have the button, which has a specific white and a content and a width and all those kind of things. And I made it pale violet red. And then I added a style to that button. And that style that I added is actually a trigger. So there's something called style triggers, which will trigger a style change. And the trigger is run once the mouse is over that button. And that will set things. So what it will do is it will set the font size to the values that we have specified here. And now here we assigned that value true means it will be triggered once this is mouse over is true. And that's true once we hover over our mouse, or once our mouse is over the button. So if we run that, we should see some changes. And this is a rather long approach to just having a hover functionality, but it's a lot more that we want to use here. So you see, I hover over it and the color changes to this bluish color. And then we have this text which appears bigger than. So the value changes to 30. So that's great and all, but why do we need to have this long code? Well, the thing is that we are using properties here. As you can see, this thing is called property, and actually the width is a property, the content is a property, background is a property, and they depend on dependency properties, or they are connected to dependency properties. And they are important for data binding, as I said, what we will cover in the next video or one of the next videos, but they are also important to have this trigger event, or that the button is aware of what is going on. So let's go ahead and create a button inside of our main window method. Just gonna create a button, and now I want to check out the class itself. So go to definition. So you can simply press F12 to get to the definition. What this will do is it will show me the button class, and as you can see, it's a class that inherits from button base. There is a static read-only dependency property, which is default property, is cancelled property, and is defaulted property. So not too much. But what you also can see is that there is actually a normal property here. So this is a CLR property that we have here, which is called is default, is cancelled, and is defaulted. And those are connected to those dependency properties. So it represents a property that can be set through methods such as styling, data binding, animation, and inheritance. So the data binding, as I said, is something that we'll cover later on. Styling, that's good, what we have just done. We styled our button, and we can use animation and inheritance with that. But now let's have a look deeper into the button base. So we know that button is inheriting from button base. Then we can go to the definition of button base and check, all right, it's a content control class. So button base is inheriting from content control, which, well, the button base has a rooted event, as you can see here, a click event, and we've seen last time what a rooted event is. And it has plenty of dependency properties as well, such as is pressed, click mode property, command target, and so forth. But we have not touched some of those yet. But what is even more interesting, if we go even deeper into the content control, we can see that there is a property that says has content. So this one is taking care of all the content of the button. For example, the text is a text block within our button. So if we have content within our button, then it's handled by this class, so by this content control class. And actually we can go even deeper, go to definition, and here we will find plenty of dependency properties and two rooted events. And this control class has dependency properties called padding property, then border brush, so the color of the border, then a vertical content alignment, horizontal content alignment, and now here this one is interesting for us because we used it. It's a background property. And that's exactly the one that we have set in our XAML file. As you can see here, we set the background to pale violet red. So we can access those dependency properties via our properties here. So these are our properties, like font size, font family, background, foreground, all those kind of things that we are using when we work with controls. And a button, for example, is a control, or a text block is also a control. So they all inherit from this control class. And they all have these dependency properties, which then trigger and inform about, well, changes. So here we see also that there is something important about dependency properties, and that's that they are always static and they are read-only. So this is very important. Also, what you can see is that they always end with the property name. So here, whenever we define a dependency property, we say background, which is the same name as the property itself. So here, for example, where is it? There is background, but then also the term property at the end. So very long story, and we dug very deep, but that will show you a little more what those dependency properties are and what we are working with all the time. So we are playing around with properties, but they actually work around with the dependency properties. Why do we need all of this? Well, just to understand what's going on here with this trigger. WPF is using a dependency property here. So for example, this is mouse over, and is mouse over provides a chain notification to WPF with the help of dependency properties. And that allows us to set the value to true. And then also, if you check it out, because that's something that I haven't touched yet, actually there were build errors, so we need to get rid of this button here. But what I haven't covered yet or touched on yet, which is pretty important, is the following. So you can see we have this trigger, and it says property is mouse over value true, and it will trigger once this is mouse over is true. What will it do? Well, it will set properties such as font size to 30, And let me show you again. Okay, as you see. But now if I leave the button, you can see, hey, it's changing back. And that's done by this dependency property. So it's informing about what's going on, and it's setting the value of font size back to its original value. So as you can see, it's only true while the mouse is over. And that is possible through dependency properties. Now, another thing about dependency properties, because I said they should always be static and read-only, and that is because all controls should be shared and available. So you don't want a control to only be available once, you also want it to be available for other classes and other views and so on. And it's static because the value should not be changed after initialization. And this chain notification that dependency properties trigger is required for data binding, for animation, for triggers, as we've seen here, for styling, and so forth. Now, if you want to go ahead and create your own dependency property, you can do it the following way. So I'm going to create a new property in this class here. I'm going to call it, actually, let's put it at the top. I'm going to call it public int my property. And as I said, this is a CLR property. And in here, I will need to have a get and a set. But that's not going to be enough. I'm going to adjust those in a second. Let's create a dependency property for that my property. So I'm going to create a public static read-only dependency property called my dependency property. Dependency property. And that one should be initialized straight away with dependency property dot register. So we are registering a new dependency property, and we need to assign multiple things. For example, we need to have a string name. I'm just going to call it my property. Then we need a property type. So of which type should this property be? And as we have seen here, the property that is my property is of type int. So I'm going to use type of int. Next, we need the type property owner. So owner of the type, and the owner of this type of my property is my main window class, because, well, it's in the main window class. So we simply say type of is going to be main window. And now we need to also hand over the property metadata. So I'm going to create a new property metadata, which will be 0. So I'm just going to enter 0 here. Nothing too fancy there. And that's it. So that's how we can create a dependency property. And now my property itself should also be influenced by this dependency property, of course. And in order to do that, I need to go ahead and adjust the get and set. So getter should be return our get value, my dependency property. But now we have this problem that the value of the dependency property is of type dependency property. And even though we said that it's of type int, we still need to cast that to being an int. So I'm going to cast that into an integer. And now we can go ahead and actually close this getter, or close the statement, better said. And now the setter should be set value. And here I set my dependency property to the value that was given. So that's what we're doing here. And that's how you can create your own dependency property. So this is what's important: static read only. You need to create it as a dependency property type. You can give it a name, then you need to register it, and you need to give it a name, a type, and where the owner is, or what the owner is, so the class in which the property is created. And then you need to hand over some property metadata. So you could add some additional property metadata. As you can see, there are 4 different overloads, and you can hand over an object, which is the default value. And I'm just saying, okay, default value is 0. So my property is going to default to 0 because of my property metadata that I've set up here. Alrighty, so plenty of stuff here. And Depending on what you're going to develop, you might never create your own dependency properties. So no worries. If you at one point need to use dependency properties, then just check out how to create your own ones. Otherwise, you can simply use the properties that we had here. And for an end user, or let's say for a developer who just builds the UIs, it's not going to be that relevant, but I just wanted to show you how things are built up and what's important here. All right, so see you in the next video.